evening. It is a pleasure to be here at Mediamorphosis, and it is a pleasure to be able to share with you some aspects regarding this impact of technology. As you know, we philosophers talk about taking this time not to find answers, not so much to find answers or action plans or practical implementation tools, but much the opposite. That's a typical thing of philosophy. So based on what we view as facts, as phenomena or events, so we start from the fact, from the actual impact of technology. First, in the media, which is what you have come here to look for. Damian's proposal is he has asked me to discuss this issue of how technology transforms our existence and something that we do not assume in a way. So that's the topic to discuss, this not assuming, this conservative attitude. I believe that overall we are all too conservative regarding technology. We are very conservative overall. There is a conservative facet of humans that's fighting against the other facet that opens up technology, which is a facet of permanent transformation. So I believe it would be interesting for me to discuss this issue. I believe that area of stress between a conservative facet and a revolutionary facet in connection with technology, there is much intensity there because the development of technology necessarily creates areas of transformation which, radicalized, can take to the denial of what we are. And there we have this conservadorism, fit of conservadorism. So we allow technology to modify dramatically what we are, and we get frightened about that. So we cling to these areas like ethics and religion and metaphysics, which we have invited centuries ago to be able to overcome and survive this idea that technology is overwhelming us all the time. Why are we so much afraid? Because it goes very deeply into things. I believe that this is key. We always need to think about technology. We need to be thinking all the time about technology because it is very much, it's very tight. When I was preparing for my talk, I remembered several years ago, during teachers' training sessions through the Ministry of Education of the nation, I would speak with teachers about the use of technology in the classroom. And regardless of the actual problem, what was expressed at that meeting was disappointment of teachers. They were calling for help. There's something that's not working. And what I would permanently hear in that discussion was a permanent complaint because of lack of concentration of students. There was consistent criteria among teachers of different disciplines and of different generations, and they would all claim and complain about the same thing. Children spend their time doing 4 things at the same time, so they can't focus. Why am I taking this point? Because when this problem arose, the question we asked to ourselves was the opposite question that we were expecting. Isn't it that we can't do 4 things at the same time, and that's why we get impacted by it? Isn't it that the 21st century proposes different temporal spaces, and a teacher who was trained in the past century cannot deal with this new trend. Not just being able to do 4 things at the same time, which is what this technology provides us with as a possibility, but something that's much worse than that, which is rethinking the idea of concentration, of focus. Because let's not just think about the children taking pictures, texting, looking at the blackboard, and doing something else at the same time. We can question the concrete possibilities of what should be done inside a classroom or not. And there is another discussion that's not relevant, but I'm going to mention it in passing, like redefining what a classroom is. It's incredible that a classroom is a closed compartment with 4 walls, where technology demolishes walls. A social network is a classroom. A TV program is a classroom for me. I believe we are in post-classroom times. Just to give you a good term that people like and that sells. There's this post-classroom trend. There's something worse than that. That's the perception. How technological transformations change our perception. What is to concentrate, to focus? In the area where we have philosophy, sociology, psychoanalysis, and neurobiology, if you will, let's define what concentration means for a 16-year-old in this domain. These kids were born digitally, inside the network, where their skills and capabilities for doing different activities are very different from ours. We come from a literary world. We are the children of a literary world. We come from a world that have triggers that are totally different from the current ones. There isn't a single reality with different perceptions. The reality is increasingly what we perceive of it. So what we have inside that classroom is not a conflict about approaches to reality. We have juxtaposed realities, realities in conflict in a classroom. We have 2 or 3 or 10 or multiple realities that are permanently struggling with each other, where to focus as a perceptive act becomes something else, a different thing. We find it hard for this generation, for the generation that was trained in the institutions of the 20th century, all the 20th century institutions, from the school to the language, from the family to what have you, the language as an institution. Let's not forget that institutions regulate, form, structure. So we come from an institutional world from which we find it hard to give room to the phenomenon of a new world that's being impacted by IT or media or virtual or digital technologies, what have you. So, as of the IT revolution of the 90s, there's a new world opening up. We're always late. Hegel used to say that philosophy is always late. The world changes, and there comes on horseback the philosophers trying to understand something that changes. Changes are increasingly faster. So the further we are in the structuring of our thought, the further we stay to understand a world that triggers unique people. And let me add one more problem by way of introduction. We are proud of what we are, on top of it all. If there's something that technology will help us, is that we are not. There isn't a being that stays identical to themselves. It's incredible. Nietzsche, the philosopher, when there was no internet or electricity, he was born in 1844. That's when electricity was invented. This philosopher, Nietzsche, like a prophet, he said, the I does not exist. There isn't a unit called the I. We are a battlefield. The self does not exist. There's different facets struggling with each other in this battlefield. So there's a winner one day and another winner a different day. We can't even dominate ourselves because there isn't this concept of ourselves. There's a battle zone, so to speak. So the only conclusion that Nietzsche can derive is, what are we? We are permanent transformation. We are change. If you join this philosophical approach to Darwinism or to post-Marxism or to psychoanalysis, and well, let's stop thinking that there's something secure, stable, definitive, and absolute called the human being, as if this were something close that can dominate themselves, being autonomous and do whatever they want. And we use technology, and when we don't want, we don't use it anymore. As if we were the owners of ourselves. Okay, we can struggle for us to be the owners of something. But what are we ultimately? That's what I'm interested in. And what does technology create as a rupture of that we are? The talk is called The Impossible Borders Between Technology and the Human. Why? Because one of those thinking structures that I mentioned earlier, one of those structures, can you see me all right? One of those structures that condition our way of thinking is what is generally called the binary thinking or the dichotomic thinking. This thinking brags about conceptual purity, so it tries to define concepts all the time. We are this way of thinking is affecting us. The Greeks invented this, not the current Greeks that are fighting with the IMF. I'm talking about the ancient Greeks. The Greeks whose origin gave rise to the general Occidental Western culture. This logical way of thinking, one way of logical thinking, which is dichotomic. Dichotomic means that it separates all the time what is from what it is not. I want to know what a chair is, and I want to differentiate it from a table. I want to know what a human being is, and I want to differentiate him from an animal. This way of thinking collapses, is in the process of collapsing. Differentiating a human being from an animal, well, this animal thing, this animal that we carry inside, as if we were able to differentiate the human from the animal in such a hard and fast way. Not to talk about the human from the technical fields. The logical and dichotomic thinking is a differentiating thinking. It has a big weapon. It's called the dictionary. What is a dictionary? It is a way of tightening and slave-driving concepts. What does a dictionary do? Define. What is to define? To mark limits. To mark limits. So I separate, I define, I mark limits. This is human, this is technology, this is nature, this is artificiality. This is good, this is evil. It's crystal clear for the good ones, who is always us. We are always the good ones, so we can very well differentiate who the good ones are and who the evil ones are, because definitions always have to do with the ones that define. Well, the technology that we are experiencing currently is in a way, it's creating in a way a big rupture of that binary thinking. It's breaking. In binary thinking is falling short in a way to help us understand the current phenomenon. These structures that always want to delimit things in a hard and fast way cannot understand this hybrid zone. This way of thinking borders as areas where things blend, permeate, mix with each other. It creates the feeling of monstrosity, the same feeling of monstrosity of the teacher who says that the student cannot do, that they shouldn't be doing 4 things at the same time, and that's why they cannot focus. Because what doesn't make sense in the binary thinking creates monstrosity. So that's the feeling it arises. It is overwhelming from the conceptual point of view, and it doesn't help me fully grasp what this is. So we try to understand all the time. We try to use our dichotomic structures, and we want to understand a phenomenon which is actually breaking the dichotomic structures. So we get a phone call and we are asked, how can we explain the crisis of bonds after the Facebook and social network IT revolution? So the question is already preloaded of dichotomic thinking. What is the crisis? The crisis is that bonds are lost because bonds are not virtual now. They are not real ones. But are there bonds? Yes, there are, but it's not a real one. Why isn't it real? Because it happens in the virtual world. And where's virtual world? Why isn't virtuality not real? In what sense? Well, no. Well, as soon as you start digging into it and asking questions, you realize that it's not that there isn't a crisis. We were born to die, so we are in eternal crisis. That's not a problem. Crisis is not a problem. The problem is to understand that you can get away with, that you can get out of the crisis through a dichotomy thinking. This reality breaks the possibility of it being understood by thinking. Every thinking process is structuring. It's not that I'm telling you that there is a way of thinking that will be able to get out of it. I don't know where the thinking trend is going to be in the future. But thinking is a way of setting limits. At least the ways of thinking we know. We don't know any others. But what we can do is not to take them too seriously or so seriously. We shouldn't think that they demonstrate or show reality just as it is. We know that language structures things, but we cannot get away with, we cannot stop talking. We talk about things, and too much, excessively many times. I believe that it is interesting to raise this topic from that perspective. So the core of my talk is this. Historically, when we think the relationship between the human being, human nature, and technology, when we ask the question, how is technology impacting the human being, we have two possible answers. Two answers that struggle with each other, or that fight with each other, and surely you will go for one or the other. The first answer is what is known as the optimistic view. So given the question, how does technology and IT impact the human being, we have the possibility of having an optimistic answer, a celebrating one. What does the optimistic answer say? It says, technology is increasingly helping the human being to leverage their capabilities. Let's look at the history of technology.
Ok, ni la tenía. Estaba pensando si era proveído o proveído. Me estaba yendo para cualquier lado.
It has provided the human being with possibilities for their natural functions to get maximized. We invented the hammer. What is the hammer? The hammer is like a fist. It plays the same role as a fist, but it doesn't bleed, it doesn't break as a hand breaks. It is not conditioned by the epidermis or by the amount of force that our hand has. But just like the hand as a fist can hit, when we think about the creation of technical tools, we think of them as an extension of our body. So a car is a possibility of running or racing from a pre-existing functionality. This is in accordance with the optimistic reading of technology. What technology has been created for? It's been created for the human to work increasingly better. But what this aspect does not consider is that this technology will revolutionize our idea of the human. It will leverage it. What is a computer? It is a brain, a human brain, working without the problems of the human brain, where it is in a body which needs to go to the toilet, it has problems, jealousy, envies, children. And they support soccer teams or football teams. So a brain that is not affected by all that can isolate itself and execute its functions properly. What's the name for that? Computer. But according to this reading of the technique as an extension of the human being, it isn't conceived as something that has come to deeply affect the nature of the human being. Marshall McLuhan, for example, has written about this. McLuhan says that technology is an extension of our own self. I have brought the quote. So the idea is that technology is outside of the human being and it is passive. I take the hammer and I use it, and then I put the hammer back on the table and it doesn't anything. It makes sense, it gains sense, so long as we use it. But technology is something which, just like it can be used, it can be not used or de-used. I have coined a new term, to de-use. Just like we use technology, we can de-use technology. and stop using it.
Es una visión optimista. ¿Por qué?
It is an optimistic
Porque
view.
entendemos que
Why?
a lo largo
Because we
del
believe
tiempo,
that
bueno,
over
vamos
time
a ir mejorando
we will
lo que somos.
improve what we are.
Queda la pregunta para todos
So
ustedes,
now the question is for all of you
gente de los medios,
who are
de qué manera
media-related
el uso de la
people
tecnología
is how
en los medios
the use of technology in the media gets better. If you have an optimistic view, what do you think that the media represent of human reality? So how do they improve a research process or an investigation process? Always thinking about how the use of technology is leveraging ways of media creation that have come to represent human nature or reality just like we understand it. But what happens? If you like this topic, this is analyzed by a journalist, a woman journalist. I believe she's British. Mercedes Bunz is her name. She wrote this book, which was published here 4 or 5 years ago, called The Utopia of the Copy, or La Utopia de la Copia. And then there's a philosophy of biopolitics called Roberto Esposito. He's Italian. The name of the book is Immunitas. And then there's a classic where these problems appeared in a classic book by a North American feminist called Donna Haraway. The book is called Science, Women, and Cyborgs. That book dates back to the 70s. It's a pioneer book. The interesting thing here, so the hammer is something exterior, passive, and I use it. I start using it. I start creating building structures which over time will become my habitat. Yes. Now, can I, at some point, de-use the hammer when urban development is such that we living in advanced architectures, any action that I want to perform entails the need for an amount of technology which supposedly was passive and exterior, but however its inexistence makes it impossible for me to live. The development that technology develops is not passive, because as with the passage of time, the novelties that are created from the impact of technology have come to stay. I started by mentioning a little hammer, but this hammer, over history, makes it impossible for us not to use it. So what seemed to be an outside view of technology changes a bit. It is not something that I can do without. Technology becomes part of a reality, which at least jeopardizes or shakes the celebration of a pure human nature that would be leveraging its functions with technology. I'm going to tell you an obvious case. We invented the telephone. We invented the cell phone. What does the cell phone do? It leverages a human function. Why? Because it enables us to better communicate all the time and at all times. All right. Now, that cell phone, is that cell phone used based on what human nature needs as a form of communication? Isn't it the other way about? Because the cell phone exists with the functions that the cell phone has, the cell phone ends up defining our way of communication. In simpler terms, we use the cell phone when we need to talk, or because there is a cell phone, we talk.
hablaríamos lo que hablamos
Would
si
we
no
talk as
existiese
much
el
as we
celular?
do if there were no cell phones?
Evidentemente, la existencia del
Evidently,
celular con todos
the
sus
existence
amigos,
of
¿no?
the
El
cell phone with all
WhatsApp,
the
el
apps
mensaje
like
de texto,
WhatsApp,
todo
text
eso
messages and all that,
redimensiona
all of
nuestras
that
formas
has
de
resized
comunicación.
our ways of
No juicio
communication.
valor todavía,
I'm
no
not
es bueno ni
judging
malo.
yet. This is neither good nor bad.
Pero lo que hace el celular
But what the
es
cell phone does is to
reconfigurar
reconfigure
el tiempo que le dedicamos a
the time that we
comunicarnos,
devote to communicate, what we communicate for, what do we say when we communicate, etc. So, in this case,
de la hipótesis exactamente contraria
we
de lo
have
que
a
hablábamos
hypothesis
antes,
that's
porque en
totally
este caso
contrary to the one we were just talking
no
about.
es
In
la
this
técnica
case,
una extensión de lo humano,
the technique is not an extension of the human, but the
una
human
extensión de la técnica.
is an extension of the technique. And I'm saying this provokingly, because what we are
Como funciones
shaping
humanas
as human
son
functions
producto de una
are the result
tecnología
of a technology
que nos permite o que nos
that enables us
implica
or that
determinados tipos
implies
de hábitos y consumos.
to have certain types of habits and
Esta
consumptions.
visión, vamos a llamarla pesimista
This
de la tecnología.
pessimistic view
Si la
of
primera
technology,
potencia nuestras funciones
if
humanas,
the
la
first one
segunda
leverages our
las
human
destruye.
functions, the latter
Y entonces
destroys them.
estamos en presencia de la
So
típica
we are in the
visión
presence of a
que se tiene de
typical
la
view
tecnología
of
como
technology
un dispositivo
as
que
a
viene a
device that has
destruir la
come to
naturaleza
destroy human nature.
humana. La postura, si quieren, más
That's like the
apocalíptica,
the more apocalyptic view, where we believe that technological development hinders
lo propio de
or
una
dissolves
naturaleza humana que se
something
entiende
that's
entonces
inherent
como
in a
pérdida.
human nature, and it is understood as a
Ya no
loss.
hay amigos,
There are
hay
no more
contactos.
friends, there are contacts.
Ya no me veo más
There
con
are,
la gente que
I don't
quiero,
see
porque estoy todo el
my loved
tiempo
ones anymore
hablando con ellos
because
por medio de
I'm
la
talking to them
pérdida.
over the network
¿Sí?
all the time.
Ya no hay,
Loss.
búsqueda y esfuerzo, porque
There's
todo
no
lo
search
resuelve
and effort
un
anymore
buscador.
because everything is
Pérdida.
solved by a search engine. Loss.
El ser humano está cada vez más
The
encerrado
human
en
being
sí
is
mismo,
increasingly
no sale de su
enclosed
casa.
in
Pérdida.
themselves. They don't leave their homes. Loss.
Una visión existencialista,
An
¿no?
existentialistic view,
Hippie,
a hippie view in a way.
hippie en el mal sentido.
Hippie in the bad sense of the
Pero quiere
term.
decir, en esta cosa
But I
de que
mean,
se va destruyendo la naturaleza humana por un
this
mundo
thing that
frío,
human nature is being
automatizado,
destroyed by
robotizado.
a
Son esas lecturas
cold,
como
automated
músicas,
world,
Terminator,
like a
de
Terminator
que
reading,
vienen las máquinas
where
a
machines
destruir
have
al
come
humano.
to
Por ahí
destroy the
Terminator
human.
es como
Maybe
toda
Terminator
distopía, digamos,
is like in
literaria,
any
una
literary
lectura muy
dystopia,
exagerada,
is an
pero en el
exaggerated
fondo,
reading, but
digamos,
at the
no
end
hay
of the day,
diferencia
there
entre
aren't
las
any
máquinas de
differences
Terminator
between
y
Terminator's
el
machines
celular que define,
and the cell
nuestras
phones that are
comunicaciones.
defining the way we
Entonces, toma en
communicate.
serio la visión
If we
pesimista de la
take
tecnología,
seriously the pessimistic view of technology,
es cierto que hay
it's
un
true.
condicionamiento
It's true that there's
permanente que uno
permanent
está
conditioning,
condicionado ahí adentro.
and that we are conditioned there.
Ahora fíjense, las dos posturas parten de lo mismo.
The two aspects start from the same point, in a closed human nature,
Potencia al ser humano y lo
which
hace
either leverages the human being and makes it great, or it destroys the human being. That human nature is faced with a technology which either raises him or destroys him, but where we don't doubt in both aspects or in both stances is that there is something called human nature. And technology is always assessed based on that closed thing, and that's where the key problem lies. To believe that human nature exists, to believe that nature exists as a concept, because it is neither an optimistic view. Technology frees the human being and it enables their nature to work properly, or a pessimistic stance where technology has come to destroy that human nature. It is something different, actually. Technology has come to transform a human nature which, by itself, It is open and permanent transformation. So in that sense, it's the opposite theory. Technology hasn't come either to destroy or improve. It has come to transform it. Why? Because human nature, it is permanent transformation. It just leverages the actual functioning of a human being who's always reinventing themselves. Like they reinvented themselves when the wheel was invented, or when they learned to make fire, just like they reinvented themselves over history. What's this crazy notion that there's a closed human nature? And if there were one, going back to the initial conservadorism, many of our assumptions would collapse. And a third aspect. I'd like to share with you 4 problems. The first problem, I see it as contradictions that human beings have in connection with the impact of technology in this alleged nature, in this supposed nature. First contradiction, I will pose questions. Can a machine think? Can a machine think? No. I don't know. Yes. Does it think as a human being? A machine processes. This young lady here. A human being does not process. Like yesterday, but I'm not going to bring this up. The machine executes, and how about the human being? The human being has judgments, and the machine does not. So would that be a difference? So the machine does not judge. The machine is thought by the human being. The human being is not thought by anyone then. By the human being themselves. Good. So why do we say that a machine does not think? Because we believe in human spontaneity. A machine is a device loaded with information to which we have given the ability to execute functions because it has a program. And how about the human being? We speak a language which entails a number of words. We don't choose the meaning of words. Words come prior to us. They do not depend on us. The words we use when we talk also entail a set of laws and regulations which indicate the possible ways to combine the language. So we cannot pick and choose when we talk, because we have to follow that great hidden God that regulates our language, which is grammar. Nietzsche used to say, we believe to be free because we are free from God, but we don't realize that we are slaves to grammar, because even God is a word. And grammar is prior to this. No one uses language as they will, and there is a logic that we all follow for thinking, which is the logic that we have been discussing. And we think by using words, and we think by using grammar. And we believe that we speak the language. Haha. And we believe that we think autonomously. How different are we from machines? I'm not saying that the machine is free. I'm saying that the human being is as conditioned as the machine. In any case, that's not the criteria to differentiate ourselves. I would think it in a different way. Wouldn't the machine enable an exit that the human being cannot find? I'm betting more on the machine than on the human being. Second contradiction. Do you think that at some point the problem of death is going to be resolved? Has technology ever, will the technology ever discover a way for us not to die anymore? Who believes that eventually, raise your hand, in 50 years' time, who thinks that technology are optimistic? From here to 200,000 years.
Wow, pesimistas. Gente 200.000 años.
200,000 years. Do you think that in 200,000 years human beings will continue to die like now? 200,000 years. Just make a projection 200,000 years in time. Do you think that we will be in this world? I believe that after many, many, many years, the problem of death will be solved. We will stop dying, but we will not be humans anymore. And that's evolution. That's transformation. Because it is clear that the human condition is directly linked to its finite condition. We are humans because we die. Perfect. But technology, I believe, maybe this is underlined to what I'm saying, I believe that the technological man is the next evolutionary step. We are geared towards that. The human, to me, is between the animal and the technique and technology. It's like a transit. When we talk about technological revolution, we are not talking about something that is outside. We are talking that something that is the other way about. It incorporates into the human being. Incorporate means to become a body, from the Latin. So we incorporate technology, obviously, of course. In looking at the history of the development of technology in biology, in the different areas working on life, of course, the problem of the finite life is going to be solved, and that's going to be an evolutionary leap. We will already oil by then, but in 200,000 years' time, there will be a mutation, of course. Death as a phenomenon, I believe that technology is going to solve. Incredible things have been solved. Anyway, I understand that you cannot believe in this. 90% of the worldwide population believe in God today. And the God they believe in is the God. Let's take the Western population. The God they believe is the biblical God. But we believe in a God. That's the incredible thing. Coming back to this 90%. This comes from research. 90% of miracles that Jesus made in the New Testament are solved by science and technology today. The most important one is missing, resurrection. That's just a detail, but it's within that 10%. But well, blindness, transforming water in wine. This is a problem that I'm raising. And we still believe, it's not that we are believing in new gods. We continue to believe in those stories when science and technology are showing a different thing. How am I doing with time? I have to wrap up. Okay. No, but yes. I have two more problems to raise. One is a typical problem that has to do with robotics. We are at the same time anti-robots. We are very critical of how robotics and how technological automation causes a loss of human values, but at the same time, our societies of productive labor do nothing but incorporate that technology in their production forces. That talks about about us being schizophrenic. So we want technology for production, but we are capitalists and Christians at the same time. So we get this fit of not trying to rescue the human spirit. Another paradox, and I have one more, which is the worst of all, if you will. In paradoxical terms, I have another question for you. You can read this in Michel Houellebecq's book, The Elementary Particles. It's a novel. It's great. It's a turn of the century, of the past century novel. When do you think that human reproduction by natural sex is going to disappear? Already, it's not socialized in a way. I'm 200 years time. I don't know. It's evident that the human being can start reproducing him or herself without the need to touch each other, to do those ugly things, those dirty things, which are dirty when they are used for that. I mean, there is a relationship between sex, reproduction. When that is released, not only reproduction will it be freed from its natural ties, but it will release, or it will free up sex from its metaphysical ties. Once we understand that sexual life has nothing to do with love or with reproduction or anything else. Beatriz Paul Preciado has written extensively on this. She was recently in Argentina. Contrasexual Manifesto. It's a book that you can download by this author who talks about these renovations of sexual life. What do I mean by this? Cloning. Cloning is an already existing phenomenon, and in terms of human reproduction, it will appear at any time. However, if I ask you, what do you think about this? Oh, horror. What do you mean? Houellebecq makes a joke saying, the figure of the mother will disappear. Great, hooray. The Oedipus complex is going to finish, says Houellebecq. Great. That is reinventing. It's just like technology. It neither improves human nature nor destroys it. It just transforms it. It reinvents it. What happens is that what happens to us, we always think about our present. When we think about our future, we think about it from the present. The same goes for the past, so you don't see it. But evidently, no one lives their own transformation. Those of us who are older than 40 live in a society where IT did not exist. Today, we have a lot of technology around us. We don't perceive it because we are part of it. But if you come to think of it, about the changes, I went to college, going to libraries, to look for quotes. And I'm not the nostalgic type. I would have loved to find things online. When I write, I can find things instantly, and that enables other areas of creativity in me. Nostalgia, okay, it's okay, but it doesn't contribute in terms of possibilities for transformation. One more thing regarding cloning. People are adverse to talking about cloning because the human nature will disappear. How horrible. Now, once technology Once technology saves us from health problems, we all become very technological. So we are against technology when we talk about reproduction through cloning, but we are in favor of technology for pacemakers and many other health-related elements. There's lots of technological elements that have come to save our lives when we are in peril. So what is the argument against cloning? That it disrupts the natural cycle of the human? All right, so don't bother me with that. So when you have health problems, just let the natural cycle work and follow its course and just die in peace, existentially in peace. That's a fake thinking. That's fake. It's like when you're talking about same-sex marriage and you come across people who would read the Bible literally because in a paragraph it says, damn homosexuals, but in the other paragraph it says, well, but the other paragraph then needs interpretation. So you interpret what you want to interpret, and then what you don't want to interpret, you just read literally. So we always have this instinct of saving ourselves. And let me close with something short, but I believe that it's a good example to understand everything that we've discussed so far. Just, I'd like to give you an example that has nothing to do with the media. Friendship, the topic of friendship. Pay attention to this. Friendship. You all have friends, don't you? Contacts. We have learned. Do you all have friends? Optimistic view of technology vis-a-vis friendship. Let's consider Facebook. Optimistic view, Facebook improves friendship. Friendship is friendship. It is enhanced. Why? Because you recover lots of friends. You can talk to them all at the same time. I post something that happened to me. I have 50 friends that learned about the things that happened to me. Otherwise, what would I need to do? I need to call them on the phone to tell them about what happened to me yesterday. How many can you talk to with? 10 minutes with each one over a night? So it does facilitate things. It does make things easier. Chatting, you can chat with 5 friends at the same time. So friendship, the way we understand it, is enhanced thanks to technology. Well, but you don't see them close. All right. All right. Distance is relative. You are in front of a friend and maybe, what does it mean to have a close look at them? But you don't tell the whole truth to a friend over Facebook, and then when you are face-to-face with them, you do. Like if you have a friend in front of you, you tell them the whole truth and not over a social network. That's a myth. It's a myth that you're hyper-authentic in your natural life, between quotes, and so you blame the social networks for that. That would be the optimistic view. The pessimistic view would be Facebook has killed friendship. Why? Well, we don't have friends anymore. We can't have a cup of coffee together. We don't get together anymore. We believe that friends are the contacts we have, and it's all fake, it's all false, etc., etc. Third stance, which is the one that I have brought up today, trying to walk away from this dichotomy. Neither friendship has been enhanced or destroyed. Friendship has changed. Friendship has changed. I apologize. I'm sorry for friendship nostalgic people. Nostalgia is a great aesthetic value. If we can sell it, much the better. And if we can create products with nostalgia, much the better. But beyond nostalgia, friendship has changed. Maybe it did not change for many of us who continue to have this problem of the dichotomy. I ask a 15 or 16-year-old, hey, your Facebook friends, have you realized that they are not real friends? And he will look at me and say, what are you talking about? They are friends. But are they the same for you? I mean, to have a friend you see face to face from a friend that you see over the network. No, they're all the same to me. And you ask them, but which of the two is your true friend? No, the truth has died, they will tell me. You haven't realized yet. A child who was born in the digital era doesn't have this dilemma, which I understand that we should have it. Let's think about everything with this device in mind. Friendship, the difference between the real and the apparent. Let's think the ways of doing journalism in the media with this device in mind, of doing fiction in the media. Let's think about everything with this device in mind. We are very much tightened in this dichotomy. So do media create reality? That debate is over. They neither reproduce nor create. The media create their own reality, period. It's a different reality now, where everything is transforming itself. So much so, and so deeply, and so radically, that old categories are useless, giving room to new categories